All right, so from that last example, we were looking at, could we determine if triangles were right triangles? And so that perhaps brought up some memories of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier this year in classifying triangles. So we've classified triangles by side lengths. Okay, if you recall, that was equilateral, isosceles, or, I'm having a moment, scalene. Okay, well, we could also classify them. We were using their angles, and we talked about the acute, obtuse, right, or equiangular. Now, at that time, we could only use those measurements if we knew their angle sides. That's all we could do. Pythagorean theorem allows us to use side relationships, though, to talk about the angles. All right, so we know if a squared plus b squared equals c squared, if that's true, then we've just shown that it's a right triangle. We've been able to talk about an angle measure just by knowing the sides. Well, it also happens that if a squared plus b squared, if that's bigger than c, now we're going to learn it the other way because I think it's easier to memorize, but if the hypotenuse squared is less than, then it becomes an acute triangle. Okay, so my hypotenuse is less than the square of the sides, it's acute. If my hypotenuse is greater than the sum of the two sides, then that's going to be obtuse. Okay, so this is what we're going to kind of look at in our next example. So let's go ahead and we're going to flip back over and look at that the example sheet again, please. All right, so your next set of examples, very similar to that the other one, but it's asking us to classify the triangles using the Pythagorean theorem and the converse, which is what we just talked about. So we're looking to check about a squared and b squared and how it relates to c. So if we're noticing we don't have any right angles on these triangles, so we're going to have to decide which piece is the longest, and that would have to be c if this works. So as I look at a here, I've got a 12, a 6, and an 8. This side would have to be my longest. Okay, that's the longest. So if it works, that's going to be my c. So as I go ahead and set this up, we're curious, is 6 squared plus 8 squared, how does that relate to 12 squared? Is it equal? Is it less? Or is it bigger than? So let's go ahead and punch that. So I'm going to get a 36 plus 64. And again, I'm curious, how does that relate to 12 squared is 144? So a little bit of simplification. I'm going to get a 100 and I'm going to get a 144. All right, so the alligator mouth always faces the side that's bigger. So in this case, okay, 144 is bigger than 100. The c wins, right? That's my c side. If that side is bigger, this is an obtuse triangle. Even though we don't know any of the angle measurements, okay, because of the relationship within Pythagorean theorem, I know that it's going to be obtuse. And in fact, I know that the biggest angle is going to be across from the biggest side. So I happen to know that this angle right here is going to be the largest one. And I don't know what it is, but I do know that that's where that would be. All right, so let's look at this next guy here. We've got a 15, we've got a 7, and then you got the square root of 274. So the square root of 274 is 16 and change, which is bigger than the other sides. So on this one, this side, okay, is going to represent our c. It's going to be our longest side on our triangle. So, so for b, here we go again. We're curious, how does 7 squared plus 15 squared, how does that relate to the square root of 274 squared? That's what we're curious about. Okay, so 7 squared is going to give us a 49. 15 squared is going to give us a 225. Okay, and we're not going to be scared of this other side. I've got a square root and a squared power. They're just going to cancel each other out. That is no big deal. We're going to get a 274. All right, so 49 plus 225 is also going to get us a 274, which means these are equal. So in this case, if a squared plus b squared equals c squared, this guy is going to be a right triangle. Now, because this one was obtuse, we couldn't even talk about Pythagorean triples from yesterday. This one, because it's a right triangle, we could. But in this case, again, I don't have all integer or whole number values. They're not all nice. So this is a right triangle. It would not be a Pythagorean triple, just as a nice little review from yesterday. All right, and let's check out C. So I'm going to move this up just a little bit so I've got a little more space down here. And I'll put C beneath it. So again, as we're looking at it, you've got a 15, a 16, and then a 4 square roots of 7, which is about 10. All right, so again, on this one, as we're looking at it, our longest side is going to be this 16. That's going to be our C. I'll put it down here. So we're going to check it one more time. So is 15 squared plus 4 square roots of 7, and we're going to be real careful to square that whole side. So if we think back to yesterday, we want to be sure that we've got the whole side in parentheses. And we're curious, how does that relate to 16 squared? All right, so 15 squared, we just did that. That was going to be a 225. Now, this guy, again, you're welcome to just punch that on your calculator. That's perfectly fine. If you do that, you want to be sure, again, okay, you want to be sure that you've got it in parentheses. So I would have parentheses, and then I would have 4, and I've got the square root of 7. On this calculator, I've got to do a little differently. But I want to put the whole thing in parentheses before I square it. All right. And there we go. That should get us 112. Notice the difference if I just put in 4 and I put the square root of 7 and then square it. So notice the difference with the parentheses. I will only get a 28. Because on this one, the squared only went to that square root of 7. Whereas on the first one, remember, it went to the 4, which would get me 4 squared, and that's a 16. And the square root and the squared, that would cancel with that 7. And so that's where we would get the difference with that 112. All right, so here's 112. And we're curious, how does that relate to 16 squared? That's going to be a 256. All right, so 225 plus 112, 337, and 256. Well, this time C does not win, right? Alligator always eats the bigger number. So in this case, my C is smaller. So if the C side is smaller, this is what we call an acute. Okay, that's an acute triangle. So again, my smallest angle, right? If this is my biggest side, this one across from it, this will be my biggest angle, right? So I know this guy will be the largest, but I also know that even at its best, it's going to be less than 90 degrees. But this is going to be the biggest one. Okay, across from the medium angle, that'll be the middle angle. And across from the smallest side, that'll be the smallest angle. It's just one of those things that also happens in those triangles that we want to be sure we talk about.